Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I am Edith Njuguna, and I'm the director of the Success Network. On behalf of the network organizers, Advance Illinois, Education Systems Center at NIU, and the Illinois Student Assistance Commission, thank you for joining us. This is our largest in-person conference to date. We have over 360 registrants from nearly 70 communities across the state. And we're thrilled that you could join us. How many people are joining us for the first time? Wow, welcome. And how many people are here for the 11th time? The 10th time? I know a couple of you are. Well, it's great to see all of you. So the goal of this conference is to elevate the voices of practitioners and students, to connect policy and practice, and to hear about best practices that are happening across the state in relationship to ensuring that students are ready for life after high school. And our theme this year is Awareness to Action, Promoting Equity in Education and Careers. And I encourage you to think about one action that you will take when you leave here today to support students in your community. I'd like to start by giving some background on the network, and then I'll spend some time going over our 10-year impact report, highlights from our 10-year impact report, which we're really excited to release today. So in 2009, the Illinois P20 Council set a goal that 60% of Illinois adults should have a high-quality college degree or career credential. And this was based on some work from the Lumina Foundation that showed that most jobs that pay a family-sustaining wage would require more than a high school diploma. And right now, Illinois is at 57.1%, but we will hear from our keynote speaker, Dr. Lovett, the importance of paying attention to aggregate versus disaggregated data, because we know that not all our communities or all our demographic groups are moving towards this goal at the same pace. So in 2013, these three organizations came together because we were hearing about a number of collaboratives that were coming up across the state to work across sectors to advance post-secondary attainment. But there wasn't a statewide infrastructure to support these communities. And so we thought, what if we created a network where folks could learn from one another, share best practices, serve as exemplars to others about how to use collective impact to advance post-secondary attainment. And from there, until our goal is to support communities to increase meaningful and equitable post-secondary attainment. And when we talk about meaningful, we're talking about ensuring that students are pursuing goals that they're passionate about, that feed to their strengths, and that will lead to a family-sustaining wage. And when we talk about equitable, we're talking about ensuring that we are reaching students who are farthest from opportunity. And then in 2015, we created what we call the Leadership Community Designation. So these are communities that have committed to using collective impact by bringing folks from different sectors together to come up with a shared agenda and work towards supporting students to advance to post-secondary and education and careers. And we started with 6 communities in 2015 and are now 19 communities strong. We were thrilled to add the Southern Illinois region to the network this past year, and I know they're here today and you'll be hearing from them. Could folks in leadership communities please raise your hands to be recognized? I think there's more than... Thank you. Thank you for being here. And so what are the expectations of leadership communities? We ask that they define a geographic focus area, that they document a partnership across different partners, that they identify a trusted intermediary who serves as the glue and helps move the work forward, that they commit to using data for continuous improvement, and that they develop a plan to implement key strategies. The leadership community designation is an open invitation. So if you're interested, please follow up, and we're happy to talk with you about that. And as you can see, the network has broad reach and serves 45% of high school students in Illinois. So we are eager to continue growing and invite others who would want to join this movement. So what's new since the last conference? So the Policy Committee's Transportation Work Group has been grappling with the challenges that students face while trying to participate in work-based learning. They prepared a memo that documents these barriers, and the next piece of the work will involve identifying solutions and will involve engaging with students to identify what solutions they have to that problem. The goal of the policy committee is to really make manifest the fact that we believe that what happens at the local level should be elevated up to the policy level, and what happens at the policy level should be aligned with what's happening at the local level. It's an open invitation to the policy committee. Please feel free to check out our website if you'd like to join the committee. And then network organizers believe that the most effective policy is informed by those who are most affected by any system. And that's why we created the Student Advisory Council. And we've been working with the council this past year. They've been analyzing data on dual credit and CTE and the barriers that students face. And they're going to be presenting their recommendations at lunchtime. I encourage you to be at that session, be prepared to take notes and take action. They have really good recommendations. And they're joined by board members of the Career and Student Advisory Council, so representatives of the SAC and CTSO, please raise your hands to be recognized. And the other thing we've been working on is the Success Network dashboard. So this dashboard provides information that you can download and compare your district to state averages, and it really provides trend data on a variety of topics. Right now, there's information on remediation, post-secondary enrollment, and early college coursework. And we'll continue to add more information to the dashboard, so please check it out. So now I will highlight some things that we learned from the impact report. And the goal of the report was really to identify strategies that leadership communities are using and the lessons that they've learned as they work to increase equitable and meaningful post-secondary attainment. So there were several takeaways from the impact report. And as you can see, they touch on both policy and practice. And I'll just highlight a few of them. So one of the things I learned while I was talking with leadership communities, and that we've really known for a number of years, is that leadership communities are driving policy implementation. From the inception of leadership communities, network organizers have been providing mini grants or innovation grants to leadership communities to implement some policy strategies so that they sort of are leading the way and showing others how this can be done. Many of you may be familiar with the Post-Secondary and Workforce Readiness Act that was signed into law in 2016. This uses a student-centered approach to help students transition from high school into post-secondary and careers. And one of the elements of the act is the college and career pathway endorsement. And an endorsement shows that a high school student is ready for entry-level work in specific sectors and ready for post-secondary education. And as we can see, the number of students that are graduating with this endorsement are continuing to grow across the state, but we are thrilled to see that leadership communities are offering a lot of these endorsements. Another thing we're really excited about with regard to endorsement is that several community colleges and other partners are beginning to recognize them and to offer incentives to students who show up with this endorsement on their diploma. So in some instances, they're getting reduced tuition. In other instances, they're getting the free cost of books. So encourage you to help students to participate in this because it's a valuable endeavor. And as I was working on the impact report, I had the chance to speak with some great leaders in the field and take a look at what they had to say about collective impact. So collective impact provides an approach for partners from different sectors to work together to solve difficult social problems. And it's a key organizing principle for the network, and I see that leadership communities find it to be a useful approach. Another thing that I learned when talking to leadership communities was the variety of ways in which they're advancing equity. So in East St. Louis District 189, for example, they heard from the Superintendent Student Advisory Council that the council would like more students to have access to AVID, or all students to have at least 1 year of AVID, which is a college and career readiness course. Initially, only students who had taken the course in middle school were able to take it once they got to the high school. But the district heard what the students said, and they're making this available to all students. And then in the Black Hawk region, the work-based learning coordinator is shifting the burden from students to employers. So when she works in schools where students don't have access to vehicles, instead of having students go to employers for career awareness and exploration events, she asks employers to come to the school. So making it easier for more students to have access to those opportunities. So we know that there are many factors that lead to student success, but we believe that some of the strategies that leadership communities are using are really helping drive positive outcomes for students. So as you can see on this graph, there have been dramatic declines in remedial math and English. And leadership communities have been leading the way and are continuing to do so. This is huge. It means that tens of thousands of students across the state are now able to enter into credit-bearing math and English courses at any Illinois community college and some four-year institutions, and therefore don't need to spend time taking remedial courses, which takes up time and money. And we know that many students who take remedial courses often end up not graduating. Juan Jose, go ahead and clap. So that's something we definitely celebrate, and I think that the collaboration with the partners in leadership communities is helping drive this work forward. And then another area to celebrate is financial aid applications. So relative to the entire state, the Success Network had higher rates of 12th grade students starting and completing a financial aid application. And we know that completing a financial aid application is often the first step in making post-secondary education possible. Leadership communities also identified some challenges, and these are aligned to both practice and policy. So as I mentioned, we ask that leadership communities identify an intermediary organization that serves as the glue and helps move the work forward. I heard from many communities that often the person who plays this role is wearing several other hats, and it makes it difficult for them to keep the work moving forward. So we're going to be figuring out ways that we can be more supportive of intermediaries. And there are some communities that have come up with interesting ways of dividing the role across organizations in order to get the work done. I also heard about the need for better socialization of the value of dual credit. There are partners who don't believe that dual credit is rigorous and so are not willing to offer the course. But we know that research has shown that it really provides students an opportunity to learn to get ready for post-secondary education. And then the lack of transportation for work-based learning is something I heard as well, and this aligns with what the transportation work group of the policy committee is finding also. And then the lack of qualified instructors to teach dual credit was something that came up as well. And the network organizers are monitoring the implications of the Dual Credit Quality Act amendment that was passed in 2022, and we'll be figuring out how we can be supportive of that to ensure that more students have access to dual credit opportunities. And so what are the implications for the network moving forward? So as you can see, we have quite our work cut out for us, both from a policy and practice perspective. And these are some of the things that we'll continue to work on in order to support leadership communities. And then I'm consistently hearing about new innovations and ideas from our amazing leadership communities. I asked them if they had any advice for others, and you can see some of the things that they had to say. So I encourage you to download the impact report. There's a lot more information in there. And if you find something that you'd like to learn more about, please reach out. If you'd like to be connected to one of our leadership communities, we're happy to do that. Leadership communities, I just voluntold you, but they're always willing to share what they're learning with others. And then looking ahead, this spring, we have 3 webinars, and they are free. On March 19th, we'll hear from 2 nonprofits about how they work with their school partners to provide work-based learning. On April 23rd, we'll hear about supporting and scaling post-secondary readiness through stakeholder engagement and continuous improvement. And on April 29th, we'll hear about the AI-ready workforce, how AI will transform jobs that offer pathways to economic advancement. I know many of us have feelings about AI, but that should be an interesting session. Please register on our website. The sessions are now open, and encourage others to join. So before I leave, I just want to say a big thank you to a number of people who have made this conference possible. First, our funders, the Joyce Foundation and Grant Victoria Foundation, who have been steadfast funders of the network. Thank you. And then the conference planning committee, Cheryl Flores from Advance Illinois, Sarah Clark and Laura Monteagudo from Ed Systems, Sam Nelson, Beth Groves, Anna Moya, and Jasmine Jeton Gonzalez from ISAC. Thank you all for the time and thoughtfulness you put into planning the conference. I also want to thank all the speakers who have taken the time to prepare outstanding presentations that will equip us with the information we can act on and tools we can use when we return to our communities. A big thanks also to our MCs, Cheryl Flores and Sam Nelson, who you'll be hearing from shortly. On behalf of the network organizers, thanks again for joining us. We are honored to work with so many colleagues who are committed to ensuring that Illinois students have the knowledge and skills they need to succeed. And now it's my pleasure to welcome Dr. Kyle Westbrook, the Executive Director of Education System Center at NIU, to introduce our keynote speaker.
Good morning, everyone. Come on. Let's do this again. I'm going to do it like I'm a high school teacher again. Good morning, everyone. There we go. Thank you so much. And so good to see all of you here, to see all these tables full, to see all these smiling faces all here, ready to learn more about what's happening in the state of Illinois and what's happening nationally from our keynote speaker when it comes to supporting our students. It's really a testament to all of the dedication of the folks in this room that, with all the things that you could be doing with your day, that you've chosen to spend it with us, learning, hearing, sharing. And, I was thinking about this, that, when you're in these, coming up to speak, I was thinking, oh, got to find something really smart and clever to say, and then I'm like, no, I just need to make it up the stairs and not trip after having 4 cups of coffee this morning. And so I'm really excited to be in this role, to be excited to support this incredible team at Ed Systems Center, who I've spent the last 7 months getting to know and learning about their work, and also feeling inspired every day that I get to work with them, inspired because of their service to our students, service to our communities, and really service to our state. Someone who has, served our country, frankly, is our keynote speaker here, Dr. Kenyatta Lovett. And I'm going to share his biography here, someone who I think very highly of, and his biography does not capture, frankly, the depth of work that he does on behalf of our students across this country. Kenyatta Lovett serves as the principal of postsecondary attainment at the Education Strategy Group. Under his portfolio, he leads strategies to set goals and improve attainment, non-credit to credit strategies, adult attainment, and credit mobility. Kenyatta served as the managing director for higher education and workforce at Educate Texas. In this role, he managed a portfolio of programs to support the organization's strategic plan to significantly contribute to the attainment goal of Texas. Under his leadership, Kenyatta led statewide initiatives focused on improving outcomes in college access, work-based learning, and transfer and credit mobility. Prior to Educate Texas, Kenyatta served as the Assistant Commissioner for Workforce Services at the Tennessee Department of Labor and Workforce Development. There, the agency launched, under his leadership, the state's first apprenticeship office and improved collaboration with the state's higher education system. In 2016, Kenyatta Lovett helped to launch the nation's first education advocacy group focused on increasing post-secondary attainment, Complete Tennessee, serving as the executive director, and that's when I had the good fortune to meet Dr. Lovett. Prior to joining Complete Tennessee, Kenyatta served as the Assistant Vice Chancellor of the Tennessee Board of Regents and also served in various roles at the Volunteer State Community College. Kenyatta led statewide initiatives for community college system in Tennessee and played a critical role in the implementation of major higher education reforms, including the Complete College Tennessee Act of 2010 and Governor Haslam's Drive to 55 plan. The Tennessean recognized him as one of the key people responsible for the successful launch of the Tennessee Promise, the state's initiative to cover tuition for high school graduates that were attending a community college. And I'm going to pause here and say that this was an incredible piece of legislation that I think set the tone nationally for what government can do within its power, within its budgetary, often constraints, to support students at a systemic level. And Kenyatta was right there helping to lead that charge and make sure that our students were well served. Kenyatta serves on national advisory boards to advance the growth of credential to career strategies and regional collaboration to improve economic mobility. He's an adjunct professor at Tennessee State University and Lipscomb University, has served as a columnist and a contributing author for topics related to higher education, public policy, and governance. Kenyatta is a BFA from Howard University, MBA and PhD in public administration from Tennessee State University. So please join me in welcoming my friend, Dr. Kenyatta Lovett, to the stage.
Thank you, Kyle, and good morning, everyone. I have to return the favor and brag on Kyle. We met each other during my time at Complete Tennessee, and there are not many warriors that have had a few tours of duty in this fight, this game for equity and outcomes and attainment across the nation. Kyle is one of the very few that I think of, lean on, learn from, and inspired by. And so I want to just recognize you, Kyle, for your leadership, what you mean to this state and what you mean to this nation. Again, good morning, everyone, and I want to thank Edith for that great presentation and overview. I want to thank our elected officials who are here and even any of our public officials, our funding partners, higher education institutions and partnering organizations, each community that's represented of the network that's here, and most importantly, our students we're all here to make sure that economic mobility, a promising pathway, is much more promising for you in the future. First and foremost, before I get started, you heard Texas, you heard Tennessee, you heard national work, but where are my Greater Peoria Pathways team? Are they? Okay, all right, good. You're wondering why I called you out. But there's a backstory. My father, unfortunately, passed away a little bit over a year ago, but he is a first-generation student from Memphis, Tennessee. Didn't know his father, lost his mother at 16, paved his own way, learned how to lay bricks and become a brick mason. He sat out of, after high school, spent an entire year laying bricks to pay for college. Hitchhiked back and forth to Arkansas Pine Bluff, which was, I think, Arkansas A&M or A&I at the time. Lo and behold, he found after he graduated, went back to laying bricks because he was a history major, and we're talking about pathways and where could he find a job as a historian, and got a phone call from University of Arkansas that someone actually had, and think about this in today's times, had called him and said, can you show up tomorrow because you actually have been enrolled and have a scholarship to get your master's at the University of Arkansas. So he called the Trailways at the middle of the night. Not only did they pay for his tuition, there was a stipend for my mother at the time, his spouse, to be okay while he was in getting his master's degree. Think about that today. And from that pathway, he became one of the first African Americans to be a graduate history student at the University of Arkansas, so much so that they inspired him to go on and get his PhD. Now, I'm going to bring it back to the Illinois context. So his very first professor assignment was at Eureka College. If you know that big city outside of Peoria. And that is my birthplace, is Eureka College. And so always near and dear to my heart is Illinois, because I am, I consider myself to be a citizen of Illinois. This is the place by which I launched, but also when I think about my father, this was the place by which he launched his career. 8 books, almost 9 before he passed. Tons of recognition from the state of Tennessee and Memphis and Nashville, and plaques and honors and dedication to the Bicentennial Mall, to his work. But it was a start here in Illinois. So just wanted to thank my Peoria team, and just know it is always an honor to be here. And I want you all to think about something. I asked this question in job interviews for candidates. The only way that you'll sustain this fight, because it gets tough, Kyle and I can tell you, you take a lot of bumps over the head and a lot of roadblocks, is you have to think about that moment of, what was it that you saw that you said shouldn't be? For me, it's my father. I want to make sure anyone that looks like Dr. Bobby Lovett can be just as successful as Dr. Bobby Lovett today, as he had his pathway back in the day. But I want you to take that time to sort of crystallize that in your mind, that person, that situation, that moment where you recognize this shouldn't be in our state, in my community, in this world, in terms of economic mobility. And I guarantee you that will sustain your fight long term, because sometimes it won't make sense. You'll ask yourself, why am I in these meetings over and over again? Am I getting anywhere? But trust me, if you stay with that fight, you will make a difference. And I've seen it from a lot of people in this room and a lot of my colleagues across the nation. So I just want to get into our presentation. And I want to start by saying this conversation is around equitable outcomes powered by regions. And this is a beautiful network that's made of groups that have considered themselves to be a region. This is about the local context of disparities. It's one thing to experience poverty in a rural community versus experiencing poverty in an urban community. Those things aren't alike, and so you have to consider what that context looks like. We also know that attainment plays out differently for each region. Some of you will notice, and we'll go over some of the data from Lumina in more detail, you may have to get to 52% to support the state's 60% attainment goal. Other communities, and I went to work with this in Tennessee, have to get to 32% to get there. All that means is that everyone is working together to make sure that as many citizens and residents in the state that can earn and want to earn a degree or credential can. And so it definitely has a regional play out. And then when we decide to be a region, and I've seen this happen in powerful ways, and I've seen this not work out not so well, there's power in considering yourself to be a region. I'm not sure about Illinois right now, but surely there are no county beefs or town beefs, or right? Everyone gets along. There's no lines that have been divided, or we do it here this way, or okay, so it happens here too. Okay, good. But when you let all of that go and you decide, hey, what happens if we all come together and sit at a table and figure this out for the sake of our students? I guarantee you, I've seen it across the nation. I've been a part of it in different ways. Powerful things can happen. And it's nothing more beautiful than to hear a student talk about opportunities that didn't exist yesterday that exist today, because leaders came together and decided we want what's best for our students and for our future of our community. So I want to get into a little bit about the data that Edith mentioned. Lumina's goal is 60% by 2025. We'll fall short of that, but there's importance in them setting that goal. It set a drumbeat for our nation. Illinois' goal is 60% by 2025, and you saw that 57.1% is where we are currently, and I think those are 2022 numbers, if that's right, Edith. So chances are Illinois will probably reach its goal. You will be one of a very few states by 2025 when you finally see those numbers that will reach your goal. I think Minnesota may be one, and I'm going to mention Minnesota later because It's worthy of celebration, yes, but there's much more work to do. You'll see the current progress nationally and also for Illinois. The pace seems to be right at what the national pace has been for Illinois. But I want to give you the clear distinction, and this is what I want to talk about in a little bit of my conversation, that distinguishes Illinois' goal from Lumina's goal and what even we had in Tennessee with the Drive to 55, which is 55% by 2025. And that is, I underlined it, that it's not just about attainment, but attainment for what? And that was a question I received from employers who were excited about more degrees and more skills, and chambers of commerce that were excited about this. But then they asked me the important question: are we just producing degrees to say that we counted degrees? Or is this going to matter for our people? And is this going to matter for our economy? You specifically have placed this in your attainment goal, that not only are there degrees and credentials that you want your students to earn, but you also want to make sure that they're high quality post-secondary credentials, which means economic mobility is much more promising. And I want you to recognize that and continue to push towards that. That it's in service to what? And we're going to ask those questions, and I'll give you a little time to think about it, but you have responded to what Lumina has placed, at least as a baseline, to say, for this state and for our students, we want to make sure that when they do get that degree, they can move on and start their families and start their own businesses and grow. And I can guarantee you, for anyone who's a first-generation student, my father, first generation, still one of the only in his big family with the degree after all this time. But to his credit, 5 kids, 6 bachelor's degrees, 6 master's degrees, and 1 PhD. That wouldn't have happened without his courage and his sacrifice. And so him having a pathway forward to make a way for us, what I see in that underline is what you've committed to is you want that pathway forward for the students with the greatest barriers to success. Now let's get to the real dynamics between averages and equity. And there was a joke about wonder what happens when a statistician would walk across a river with an average height of 5 feet. Would he be able to make it through? Because I'm sure there's some parts that are 20 feet deep. There's some parts that are 2 feet deep, right? And you can't really say much other than the average is the average. But this right here outlines each of the counties within Illinois. And so you'll see there are very few big bubbles that are, either near the goal or have exceeded it. But there are a ton of smaller ones that are very far from the goal. So the delta between, what makes up the 57.1% is something that we all should consider. And you'll see the gap there is 17.1% versus 61.7%. Ladies and gentlemen, that's a huge, huge disparity. So although we can hit the goal of 60% by 2025, I think I can say this safely, that we want to see each one of those dots move beyond a level where we know that there's a vibrant, promising community wherever a student resides, wherever an adult resides, wherever a resident resides in Illinois. So I just wanted to point out this one. And as we get more into equity, because this actually goes to more geographic equity, right? And that is important. But when we think about racial equity, if you can't read the small text, the bottom lines represent our Black and Hispanic students and those outcomes as it relates to this 57.1 outcome. And you'll see again, looking at that headline, the delta is pretty big. It's really, really big. And you've got to ask yourself, how does that play out 10 years from now, 20 years from now, if 70% of the jobs or more in Illinois are going to require some level of a post-secondary degree or credential? What does that mean for individuals and households who can't take part in this promising, vibrant economic future for the state of Illinois? And what does that look like in your community? What does it look like in the communities that you drive through? And what can you do, and what you already are doing, to make sure that we can narrow those gaps so that it's not as severe, and at one point, hopefully, the gap is totally closed, that prosperity is available to all. So, I want to spend a little time and ask you a few questions to get you some time to talk amongst each other at the table. It's important to set goals. And again, this has been since 2009 that Lumina has put us on this pathway toward a goal. And we just recently at our organization wrote a Forbes article specifically on that of what has happened since then. And so I want to take a little time, just 2 minutes. I'll give it 3 minutes. Like another minute is going to really help. But I want you to just at your table share your thoughts of, had Illinois not set a goal for attainment, what would not be present today in the solutions, the programs, the changes, the reforms that we see now that we didn't see prior to setting that goal? So take a few minutes and just talk amongst your group of what does that goal mean and what is that inspired that you wouldn't see if this hadn't been a goal? I hope you had a chance to share a few things about what this drumbeat has allowed for the state of Illinois. There are two other questions that I want to just pose, and we don't have to talk through them, is we can get focused on just a number. And as long as we hit 60%, fine. And again, for the state of Tennessee, it's just credentials and degrees, doesn't matter what. Illinois has been much more specific. But I always want you to spend some time to ask, in service to what? 20, almost 30 years ago, we believed as long as access was important, that should be all we needed, and we improved access programs. And finally, someone asked the question, in service to what? Because they're getting into college, but they're not staying in college. And then all of a sudden, there was this retention and completion movement, and it was like, let's provide the services so that they could be much more successful and get that degree. Well, that was fine, but they got the degree, but they didn't get the job. So in service to what? And this is a journey. This is not going to be the only solution that's going to get economic mobility in an equitable manner much more promising in the future. This is a journey that we learn from each step of the way. And I want you to always ask yourself, just in service to what? And then more specifically for each of you in your communities, because yes, this is the state of Illinois, but in terms of what matters to you most is where your kids go to school, where you learn and you communicate and you collaborate, and it's your community, and reaching this goal in an equitable manner, asking that question and really seriously challenging yourselves on that question if it's really true. What will be better in my community by reaching that goal? Asking those questions are tough. It will make you recognize some things that you may need to address. It may also help you to understand there may be more people that you need to bring to the table. But this is the point of attainment. This is a point of making sure our students have those credentials, have a pathway forward that's much more promising. I'll leave with this, because I know we're at time. Goals guide action. And we just talked about that when you all had your table conversation. Regions guide collaboration. That means that everyone has to be an equal and contributing partner. And I want to talk a little bit about inclusion, meaning that part of this equity move is not just about we want to see our students, regardless of their race or ethnicity or geography, or they're successful in the game. This equity movement is also about each of you in your communities of asking yourself, who is not at the table to support this effort? What nonprofits do we not know about? Which city or town leader that we can't stand but is vitally important to this that we need to call and ask them to come to the table? What policymaker that we totally are fundamentally in opposition with but can really help us, whether it's in Springfield or just even within the city town halls, that can be effective in this work, that we need to figure out how to get them to the table and join the effort. This is about you too. So I want you to always be challenging yourself of, are we being inclusive and equitable even in our approach to inclusion and equity? And then the last thing I'll say, and this is really more about policies, process, and practice is enabling conditions guide opportunities for progress. And what I mean by enabling conditions, you heard Edith mention some policies that have been passed. There are more that are being worked on right now in Springfield and even at the city level. These things create the conditions for each of you to do your work much more effectively in order to support our students. And so ask yourself, too, if there are barriers, what are the ideal enabling conditions for us as a group, as a network, as a community to do our work much more effectively? Are there bills that need to be passed or removed? Are there processes that need to be redesigned or even created from scratch? The enabling conditions are necessary. Otherwise, you'll be banging your head against the wall because you can get the students to a certain point, but if there are policy barriers that don't allow that to be, what are we really doing? And that's where the work is first creating those enabling conditions so that you can empower your work much more effectively. I'm going to stop there and just say I want to thank you again for the opportunity to say hello. Hopefully these slides and my comments have been very helpful. I am committed to the work, and thank you again, Kyle, for always allowing me to join in on the Illinois conversation. To my Peoria team, as you know now, I am truly a citizen of Illinois, although I don't have a driver's license or any of that stuff. I'm excited about the work that you all are moving forward with. It really, really excites me to know that communities have been committed to this, and the work will no doubt render great benefits to the state and to your individual work. But last but not least, for our students, I know you probably haven't heard it, or maybe you did, but you can hear it again. We need you. You are our future, and you have to be very successful and very supported so that when our time ends, that we know that this world's going to be even brighter than it is today. So thank you for spending the time to be here with us today, but also thank you for just being you. Thank you, everyone. I didn't know I'd be on the hot seat, so.
I did, which is why I wore these socks. I mean, I got to match the, color coordinate with the logo and all of the swag for the day. So thank you again, Dr. Lovett, and really appreciate it. And, also want to begin to put the, full court press on for you to join us in Illinois. Move to Illinois, but we're going to have a longer conversation about that later. Can you share a little bit about your leadership journey and in advancing equitable post-secondary attainment, and what are some of the key lessons that you've learned along the way?
Yes, and I'll start with the very important point in my career. Again, I was at a community college. Tennessee had a very interesting moment of change and reform, and in 2010 they created something called the Complete College Tennessee Act. What's important in that act was that it made completion a focus, one, but it also changed the funding where 100% of the funding in Tennessee is totally driven for our public higher education institutions on outcomes. And within those outcomes, there are metrics and weights around equity. And so, in leading or being a part of the leadership efforts of bringing that to bear, it gave me something more to stay in higher ed about. I'll be honest with you, Kyle, I was ready to leave higher ed until that act because the enrollment game only just didn't do it for me. So, that then led to what we have is a drive to 55, and there was more work to do and work around communities. And then, of course, Complete Tennessee, you and I connected. That allowed me the work to sort of go around across the state and talk about equity in different ways, whether it was, small towns that had lost a major employer to urban areas where we thought things were great, they weren't so great, and really starting to connect what the state had tried to do, very similar to the great work that's happening with the network of just making sure equity was in its best contextual frame for each community to know that, if Tennessee is going to be successful, you have to find a way to support it in your own individual way.
I want to follow up on the the Complete Tennessee work and that legislation, because if my memory serves me correct, it was bipartisan legislation, and I'm curious, and it seems like that was 50 years ago in our current political context, where our two major parties can't agree on the fact that today is Thursday. What do you think it was about that legislation or do you think it was the legislation? Do you think it was the time period or the context that made it or gave it that kind of bipartisan support?
You know, there's an unfortunate reality on the policy front right now that has always been there. When we think about good policy that's in support of our students, for a lot of our policymakers, the things that resonate with them, the keywords, the buzzwords are going to be workforce development and economic development, right? Those are the two things. And I think what was very useful and by the way, everyone, what was also rare about Tennessee was there was a Democrat governor that passed the Complete College Tennessee Act, and he handed the baton to a Republican governor, Bill Haslam, Phil Bredesen, and then Bill Haslam, the Republican, to continue. And strangely, for 16 years, they stayed on the same page. I call out Bill Haslam because, in his core and in his heart, he knew what was the best thing to do for students. And so he found ways of basically, unfortunately, code switching at times to get people to support that effort. And I think it was a very, very successful endeavor, to the point that both governors, believe it or not, have their own podcast now that's called You May Also Be Right. And it's a way in which they can come together and talk about, to your point, a bipartisan approach to advancing our nation.
Thank you. And I appreciate from your talk the emphasis on the use of data really to support post-secondary attainment. Have you seen data sharing and collaboration between educational institutions, policymakers, and post-secondary education? How have you seen that kind of play out? And are there any approaches that you've seen that have been kind of innovative in that realm?
You know, most states now have what we call a longitudinal data system that combines K through 12 data, higher education data, workforce data. Other agencies sort of put information in this system, and it tracks individuals. That's great, Kyle, but it only goes so far. It's just data for reporting, or sometimes what we call autopsy data, right? You can tell people what happened, but not necessarily where it's going. And so, the data that I've seen that's been the most effective when multiple people come together is really around a human-centered design approach of what are you bringing this data for to inform and empower new programs and new ways of doing things. In the state of Tennessee, during my time as assistant commissioner, during the pandemic, you would think that, and for everyone to know, in Tennessee, not only can high school students go to community college with tuition covered, but adults can also. And you would think unemployment records, especially during the pandemic when unemployment skyrocketed, that would just be an obvious thing to connect community college opportunities where tuition's covered with those who have been unfortunately put out of jobs, right? And that took a lot of lawyers and wrangling and all that. But once we got that to work, it was a much more improved system to provide those things to happen. In other states I've seen where they get together data to think about the supportive services. I saw, Edith, that you mentioned transportation and other factors like that. What I've noticed and what I've seen, and I'll use San Antonio as an example. San Antonio, and I've worked with them, strangely decided as a city in 2020 to raise taxes. Yes, they do raise taxes in Texas. They raise taxes for a workforce development fund. That fund has produced in excess of $200 million that they have to spend from 4 to 5 years. When they started to combine and bring data together, one thing that they noticed was most organizations were serving the same people. They never knew that they were serving the same people. Sadly, most of those organizations were providing the same services. It wasn't a narrative of services that would actually get that student or that participant through. So again, from a human-centered design approach, I think when you come together and say, what data do we want to share, it has to be, again, in service to something. But I think it should be in service to making sure students have or participants have a much better journey, a seamless journey to success.
Thank you. And, you've mentioned really the work that you've done across the nation in various cities and various communities. How have you seen communities put kind of upward pressure on elected officials and policymakers to really develop those policies that help to enable or create the right conditions? How have folks at the grassroots, whether big cities, whether small towns, medium-sized towns, how have they done that and put that kind of pressure on?
I'll use Jackson, Tennessee as one example. Smaller city, but mainly in a rural area of Tennessee. One thing I'll recommend to networks, always have yourself a good, strong deck and concept paper. And they took time to say, what do we want to see different? The city leaders, led by the chamber, what do we want to see differently in our multi-county region that the governor and the state should know about? They spent about a year to just develop this slide deck, this concept document, and then began to have conversations, with different leaders. This was 8 years ago that they pushed that forward. No response. This sounds good. Thank you. Lo and behold, Ford landed its first plant in 60-something years to produce the electric F-150s right in their backyard. And all of a sudden, millions of dollars were quickly activated to that community because they had a play, they had a strategy, they had outcomes that they wanted to deliver, and the opportunity sort of met that moment. I always sort of lift them up as a great example. The other one I'll mention is we did a tour around the sort of poverty-stricken area of Nashville, Tennessee, to just talk with adults. And again, community college is free for adults, so that should be all that's needed, right? You got tuition covered. The response, Kyle, obviously was, when I did the listening tours, was no. What I did also was I took employers and I took elected officials on these listening tours so that they could actually hear that story. The mayor at the time decided, okay, we need to ship something into this conversation, and they created something called Nashville Grad. So any Tennessee Promise or Tennessee Reconnect student that attended Nashville State Community College, the city council voted that we would provide a fund to offer transportation stipends, food cards, gas cards, things like that to support them to get through. The success outcomes have been really great from that, but that again is, you mentioned, Edith, in your speech around listening to the student voice. That is your primary advisor, your board of directors that's going to really shape and change things. And if you can hear that and synthesize that in a nice way and package that to city leaders, then you have an option of producing those enabling conditions or policies that are going to be beneficial for everyone.
Well, you've mentioned a couple of these areas where you've seen some success in pushing ahead on the post-secondary goals, planning, economic development. Can you describe where has it gone off the tracks? Where have you seen examples where communities have kind of gotten off of the track, and what is the cautionary tale from those experiences where those communities didn't get to or haven't gotten to where they want to go?
There's some communities that create very beautiful, well-curated, nice tables, probably good materials and collateral about how they collaborate and work towards a common goal, but the action part is missing. And so, when we talk about equity, equity is hard. And I want to make a clear distinction. Don't ever confuse diversity with equality with equity. Those are radically different things. And so you can have a table that looks inclusive. You can have a door that looks and appears to be open. But to make that door truly open for everyone can be challenging. And I've seen a lot of communities that just quite couldn't get their arms around when it got to the hard work of this is benefiting someone other than me, that I need to do this. And I think that's the biggest failure that I've seen across the board, is that when it really gets to the real, really hard work of equity, not everyone's on board. I'd say the other thing too is people benefit from inequity. Let's just face it. There are tons of reasons why those numbers and those disparities you saw benefit others. There are employers out there in a lot of communities, rural communities that I know, that don't necessarily want attainment to increase, because that means our wages will have to increase. The question around equity is also to ask yourself, people are like, I'm good with equity. And you have to ask the question, well, are you good with him being your peer or your superior? Well, I didn't know that part was about equity. So again, I think there are people who can speak the language, talk the talk, but at the end of the day, you have to ask yourself, do they benefit from the way things are now? And what resistance will they give you if you really get down to the nitty-gritty?
And at Educate Texas, you took a collective impact approach to the work, and obviously the Success Network is really predicated upon a collective impact approach. What are some of the lessons you've learned about collective impact that you think are important for this audience and other audiences, and when it comes to continuing to push not just racial equity, but sometimes it's geographic equity? What are some of those lessons that you've learned from your work at Educate Texas around collective impact?
You have to have a mechanism or the ability to solve problems. If you don't have conflict in your collaboration, you're probably not really working. And so how do you solve those problems, and who in the room is that master negotiator? I've seen it either fall apart and no one comes back to the table, or the table's been there for 40 years, but nothing actually gets done. So you have to have what I call, or people consider me to be sometimes, as a chief agitator. You need friction. This process has to have friction in the equation. And if you don't like friction, I think that part falls pretty quickly on its face. The other thing I think too is just, how do you structure your funding? And sustainable funding is also very, very difficult to have for a lot of collective impact organizations. And the solutions look different for each community on how you can sustain and build funding. But I think don't ever hesitate to reach out. That is the part of the reason why they're part of the network, is to get experts and thought leaders to come in and help you think through, how do we structure this to work in the right way? And lo and behold, the one thing that I've seen that really sort of messes up things, and back to San Antonio, $200 million, all right, for your community. That's a lot of money, right? And power plays only come in when there's an opportunity to have power plays. And so I've seen a lot of collective impact efforts fall apart because there's a ton of resources out there. There's a stage for someone to elevate themselves, or a group to elevate themselves, and then the whole thing sort of falls apart. It really requires a balanced approach where no one wants the stage unless everyone can join the stage.
Thank you. And lastly, there's oftentimes we disconnect policy and practice. We separate them as if policy and practice exist in these vacuums. In your experience, what's the ideal interplay between practice as it happens in our schools, in our community colleges, in our community, in our communities, community-based organizations, and policy, whether that be, and this is something we've been talking about a lot at System Center, policy with a small p, which might be, an agency level policy, or might be a school board level policy, or policy with a big P from the state or from the national government. What do you see as kind of the ideal interplay between that practice that happens on a day-to-day in service of our students, and that policy, whether it be big P or small p?
For each of the communities that are here, you have good policies on the books, and that's something I've been struggling with, is we can continue to pass policies and more policies, but if you're not optimizing what those policies can deliver, what's the point of passing another policy or bill? And so I would say the first thing is, as a group, take a look at what you're trying to do in practice. Take a look at the policy landscape that allows you to do it or not do it. For those things that allow you to do it, ask the group, ask everyone, are we optimizing all that's available here? You know, you've seen the numbers on unspent Pell, right, from the FAFSA. The FAFSA's been around and Pell has been around for decades, right? And still states, I think, was it Michigan or maybe Ohio, was $130 million of unused Pell that we had to share with them, right? And so there are things out there already. You know, the FAFSA rates, either you shared it, but that's still not 100%. So obviously that means there's some unspent Pell, right? And what does that do if you are 100% filling out your financial aid? And I would imagine Illinois is probably also around $100+ million of unspent Pell. There are all kinds of different policies and programs that are out there that you really need to work to maximize, I think, first, before you figure out what other barrier you want to sort of remove later on. And so, again, looking at that and sort of optimizing it. But the other thing you mentioned, too, was the small P policy. And if you all have had to work with any public bureaucracies, you might have the enabling conditions in public policy, but there are some, let's call them stupid rules. There's stupid rules out there that just get in the way of really the full progress. And working on that little P policy, I think, is just as important as the big P policy.
Thank you, Dr. Lovett. And really, again, thank you for your time. Thank you again. You guys may not know this, but, you know, this is part of what he does, is all over the country come and talk to groups like us, and always does it whenever he's asked, and always does it with a smile and shares his wisdom and experience. And so, again, please join me in thanking Dr. Kenyatta Lovett for his comments this morning.
Thank you, Kyle.
We have a few minutes for questions from the audience. If anyone, all right, Dr. Williams, I see you.
You got to give it to Peoria first, right?
That's right, on one condition, everyone comes to my session. I'm just joking. Okay. First, thank you so much, Dr. Lovett. I am Dr. Camila Williams, Peoria, Illinois Central College, Dean of College and Career Readiness, overseeing both of what you just mentioned, that K-12 pipeline, career technical education, adult education. So my question for you, how can career and technical education programs, I guess, better integrate into broader post-secondary education systems in order to equitably support student outcomes and workforce readiness?
Yeah, it's a really good question and good movements across the nation right now. I'm sure you've heard of the P-TECH model, and that has been a good one we're working in New York now, and we're working in Texas to sort of expand those. But I want to go back to the big policies that Kyle just mentioned too. Now's the time to really think about your state plans, the Perkins plan and the WIOA plan, and how those are playing together. How many of you all have read the state WIOA or Perkins plan just in its entirety? Oh, wow, that's pretty scary. Okay, all right. But there's language in there are opportunities in there that never get optimized because we're normally just turning those reports in to turn those reports in. So I would encourage you to look at the state plan and also your local plan for your local workforce board to see how you can integrate that, because part of the issue is going to be funding. Part of the issue is going to be especially bringing in work-based learning experiences. And I'm a huge advocate that you have to provide paid work-based learning experiences for our students. So an example of something that I did as assistant commissioner was we funded through Governor's Reserve funds the workforce boards to work with their school districts to provide work-based learning experiences. The workforce board was the employer. The school districts sort of ran the program, but we forced them to partner together. So the student would obviously earn a wage to go and do a work-based learning experience. And they could also, and it's in WIOA, sometimes you can actually get additional funds for the student completing the course and the work-based learning experience. It's a small example of what I'm saying is bringing those braided resources together and providing a solution that matches up to your community, I think is the best path forward. P-TECs work great, youth apprenticeships are great, but I think, in my opinion and what I've seen across the nation, you have to design something that's going to work for the employers are going to be able to provide those experiences, what the school district can actually supply, what your institution is willing to support as well. And the last thing I'll say, because this is a conversation in New York that's been pretty interesting, is getting faculty excited about supporting students and recognizing that this is not always your traditional pathway of a transfer related or a bachelor's related, but this could be that student can come in pretty quickly, earn a credential as they're 18 or 19, get in a high-wage job. That doesn't mean that that's the end of their pathway, but that might be what they need, for their first step. Hope that helps.
Could I just actually piggyback on your question, Dr. Williams, and because you mentioned the WIOA dollars, and I know that there's probably some large percentage of people in here that when you hear the word WIOA, you break out into a sweat because of all of the bureaucracy involved in both applying for, receiving, dispensing WIOA dollars. I'm curious in that work, how did you manage, how did the district and the partners there, how did they manage that bureaucracy? Was there a person, were there resources there that could help to streamline that, the getting those WIOA dollars literally into the pockets of our students? Because again, I'm certain that if there was a door back there that said millions of WIOA dollars are back there and we opened it, probably only about a third of us would go in and get it. I'm curious, what was the bureaucracy and how did folks kind of manage that?
I'd say you have to put that in context. I'm a higher ed person that had been inserted into the agency, and then the commissioner at the time was also higher ed. So I didn't mention the current governor. So there were a series of 3 governors, and I was part of the sort of transition strategy for that governor, and we said workforce. And so what he did was inserted higher ed folks in to sort of demystify the whole WIOA world. So all that to say is, you mentioned earlier about what can communities do at the state level. I think you should engage your state workforce board to share more and more about the things that you want to see. Most people, to be honest with you, and again, I was assistant commissioner, I had 600 staff and 89 job centers and had all the titles. WIOA was so confusing that most of the staff that I inherited could only, their value was that they could interpret WIOA. It wasn't that they could activate it or optimize it. And so I had to sort of transform it into what exactly, in service to what are we going to do with this? So I would say, lay out in very clear terms, especially on the career aspect of it, what are the 3 or 4 things that you need, and see if you can partner at the state level first. Is it too late for the state plan to have this in there? If it's not too late, what do you need from us? And then how do we work with our local workforce board to make that happen? And I think with the governor that you have, with the economic development imperative of the state, your information, your feedback is going to be valuable in that transformation. And again, that's not a big P policy. That's just a little P policy. Sometimes it's just process, right? So
I think we have time for one more question.
Thank you. So in in the first question that you asked, you said that one of the most important things in enacting effective policy is getting the administrators and people that are really involved in that excited. And since we're talking about enabling students, I kind of wondered, what is one of the best ways to get students excited about this as well? I mean, I don't know. I can see that we're already enabling some of that just simply by being here. But what more can we do?
I feel like that was a planted question. Great. That's a great question. I'll be honest with you. I think just being you is important and being present. I when high school, wanted to design cars. That was my passion. So I would say find a passion. We all have a circuitous route to our careers, but we have to start somewhere. I wanted to design cars. At the time, I didn't know even what that major was. I wrote the editors of Road and Track and Car and Driver magazine to ask them what was that major. Kindly, they wrote me back and gave me a list of what the major was and what the institutions across the nation were. I found Howard University. I was going to go to Ohio State, and I know. But I was going to I went to Howard University because they were the only HBCU to have a program. This is back before the online days. So only to get there, enroll, and then ask the dean, when do I start taking my classes? And he was like, oh, we closed that program down last year, right? But what I see today versus what I had to go through in terms of you all having a passion for something and clear language, clear pathways around how you can get there, it looks totally different than what I had to go through as a student. No student should have to go through that. So whatever you want to be or want to become, I believe you can do that in your community where you reside, and I know you can do it in the state of Illinois. What you have here in this network is a pathway, a group that sort of can lay out those pathways in clear terms and give you the steps to get there. But the most important thing that you all can bring to the table is what you have a passion for and what you want to do, and let the adults here figure out how we can make sure that that's a promising path for you.
Thank you.
Please join me in thanking Dr. Kenyatta Lovett for his time again. So good to see you, my friend, and look forward to spending some more time with you today.
Thank you, Kyle. Thank you, everyone.